Welcome to the Dogtor Bros, where we have an honest discussion around vet life in and out of the clinic. My name is Adam, and I am your doc of the day. I am joined by some of my closest friends from vet school.
Hey, this is Brandon. I'm a small animal internal medicine practicing doctor in Fort Collins, Colorado.
Hey, this is Chris. I'm a GP in Winston-Salem, North Carolina.
Hey, this is Jeff. I am a veterinary dermatology associate in Louisville, Kentucky.
And again, this is Adam. I am a relief veterinarian also in Louisville, Kentucky. And today we're going to dive in a little bit and just kind of compare the pros and cons of privately owned practice versus corporate owned practice. And we'll get into a little bit more of what that means here in a minute. Before we get started, as always, we're going to start with a little game. So this one is just a quick question for you guys. Just kind of a one question, would you rather? So would you rather have unlimited time or unlimited money?
This is Brandon. I just want to clarify, unlimited time within the same lifespan, you're not going to live forever? Or is this, how are we interpreting this?
No, live forever.
Oh, okay. All right. That makes me think about it more.
This is Jeff. Unlimited money. I'm not interested in living forever. I'm very tired of the concept of having to work every day for such an extended period of time. We spend the majority of our lives at work, which is unfortunate. I'm glad I found a job that I like, but I am already planning for my retirement, setting things in motion so that I am saving appropriately for retirement. And if I didn't have to think about that, that'd be great. I'll just if I could just, I don't mind working because I like what I'm doing, but if I had all of the money in the world, I'm going to do something really, really relaxed. I'm going to be pouring beer in a brewery and I'm going to take a lot of vacation and do whatever I want. It's going to be great.
This is Chris. So just to clarify, Adam, are we what's our age? Are we just going to continue to age for forever, or is it just going to be hey, you're stuck at 30?
We'll say you stop at 35. You're 35 forever.
I mean,
I'm
going to go unlimited time then. I mean, because eventually you'll just have all the money if you do it right, or you should have all the money. If you're poor at 1,000,
just conquer the world and have all the money.
I mean, it might take a while. I'm going to go unlimited time. Final answer.
Okay.
This is Brandon. I agree. Essentially, you don't necessarily need unlimited money. You just need enough money. Mm-hmm. If you get enough and you throw it in the stock market and just let it sit, it's just going to keep growing anyway. So, yeah, I would do unlimited time. And then by the time you have essentially unlimited money, you can do what you want. Or even before that, probably.
Yeah, this is Adam. I think I would definitely go with unlimited money. Just because, unlimited time, you're going to get bored. You can go wherever you want. You can do whatever you want. But, if you're at Disney World, you ride all the rides 10 times. You're going to get bored, right? So, if you got forever, you run out of things to do, things to see. I'd rather have the money and live my life to the fullest now. And yeah, like JT said, I'm already planning for retirement. So just being able to spend that time with family would be key.
I mean, if you're living for forever, essentially, you can probably leave the planet. I'm just eventually we should have enough technology where you can go and travel space.
Yeah, and then buy space.
Or another planet. I mean,
because at that point you'd have essentially unlimited money. Oh gosh, we could go on this forever.
I want to make a confession though, Brandon. I was literally thinking, and I hate myself for this. Maybe I don't. I'm an adult. When you mentioned I can just put my money in the stock market and let it sit. Literally, when I was trying to pick which option, I was like, so if I leave X amount of dollars in the stock market and just let it grow, I know I'll be good. But gosh, I'm gonna have to calculate that, and I'll just take the money. I hate that went through my mind, but I also love it for me.
No, that's good.
That actually went way deeper than I thought it would, and I love it. So I'll take
The whole
it.
episode's just us talking about
just on that question, just debating that for 30 minutes, and that's our
fully
time.
derailed.
All right. So in today's episode, again, we're going to be kind of talking about some pros and cons and just the differences between working with a privately owned practice versus a corporate owned practice. And just for the sake of this episode, we'll kind of define the two for us. So when we're talking about a privately owned practice, we're essentially talking about a practice that's owned by one or just a few people, a small group that is at the local level. They may have multiple locations, but again, it's just owned mainly locally is what we're seeing with that. When we're talking about corporate, we're talking about the big practices, the big corporations that are spanned over large distances and own many different physical locations. So again, just for the sake of argument, that is the difference between what we're talking about. Now, in regards to corporate practice, I just kind of want to get people's opinion of where, or kind of find out where we've all worked, just for to lead into this topic. With corporate-owned practice, I'll also say there are a couple different categories there. There's kind of a broad range. So there are some that are very hands-on, like your Banfield, VCA, Blue Pearl, those types of practices. And then you have some that are a lot more hands-off, where they're almost more so just like a holding company, as opposed to hands-on practice, or a hands-on corporation. I personally have worked for all three. I've worked at Banfield, which is obviously a big corporation. I worked at a private practice who was originally a private practice and then bought by a veterinary corporation holding company. So they are technically corporate owned. That corporate is very hands off. That practice still has its own name that it had as a private practice. They got to keep a lot of the things that they had prior to being corporate owned. So it's more so just a holding company. And then I currently do the vast majority of my relief work at a exclusively privately owned practice. So it just has one local owner. So again, I'm just kind of interested to hear about you guys. What is your experience working with either corporate owned practice versus private practice?
This is Brandon. As a veterinarian, I've only worked, I guess I should say, I've mostly worked with corporate owned practice. So VCA specifically, that's where I'm working now. That's where I've worked in the past. I have plenty, I'm sure we can get into more detail on some of the pros and cons of all of this, but that's my experience. I did work in academia, which for anyone that hasn't worked in academia and is curious, it's like a corporate owned practice that is just really slow to change things. So we can talk about that in more detail, maybe. That's an opinion, but we won't get into academia as much. It's like a whole different world. But I will say, as an extern / even prior to vet school, I shadowed at a locally owned clinic. So that's my limited experience with like a true private owned.
This is Chris. I've worked at a private practice when I first came out, and then I've been part of a practice that was private and then has been corporate now. So that's kind of been my varied experience with all those, and overall the experiences have been pretty good.
And this is Jeff. For me, I've done a little bit of both. So I guess technically my current practice is a corporate practice because we have several clinics across the US, including a few international clinics. And when I was growing up, that's obnoxious. In college, I started working at I was grown up enough. In college, during our summers, I worked at the typical private practice mom and pop clinic. down. Literally, one was a mile from us, and then I worked briefly at one that was a little bit further away in the town next to us. And my experience is overall good. There is a different feel between those different types of practices. And I've also been in practices like Blue Pearl, and which is obviously much bigger and national. And I do think there's a lot of changes between the two and differences between the two that we'll get into. But overall, based on where I'm at now, I'll say net positive, honestly, with both experiences.
Yeah, and sounds like we have a pretty good mix among us of working both corporate and private owned. So we have kind of experience in, kind of both areas. So starting with corporate owned practices, so kind of thinking those experiences that you've had with corporate owned practices, whether it be the big corporation or just more of a holding company, what are some of the pros that you guys have seen with that? So one of the advantages of working at corporate owned practice over a private practice.
This is Chris. I would say kind of the bigger differences I've seen is not saying that all private practices don't have this, but I've had a 401k now that I didn't have access to when it was privately owned, now corporate owned. Better health insurance.
You didn't have a 401k when you were private owned?
Mm-mm.
Oh.
Yeah, it wasn't in part of the thing, but then that's what I'm saying. Like, it's not all of them, but we had access to it after we were corporately owned. And then health insurance was a big thing too. So we got a better health insurance plan. So those are kind of the bigger corporate benefits that we can get. Other than that, it's been, like the practicing side of things, no different. Like I would say maybe have more access to more like toys we can kind of play with. Like we can ask for this now and request it and they'll get it for us a little bit faster. But overall, it's been, I would say that's the biggest pros. It's been 401k and health insurance have been pretty awesome.
This is Jeff. I just want to comment on that. I think that's really interesting because you brought up a point I didn't really think about, which is some smaller clinics may have different retirement plans that aren't the same, quote unquote, across the board. So there is a big difference between, like, I have a 401k with my current, technically we're corporate. I feel like it's small corporate, but that's neither here nor there. But it is kind of like a standard, like you can opt in or opt out, but like everybody has that option. Whereas I know, being on my finance journey, learning more this year, that there are when you're a smaller business, sometimes you either don't offer the option or there are different smaller options as far as retirement, but it's just different. Not necessarily good or bad, but you may have to be a little bit more creative.
And this is Brandon. Yeah, I agree with everything you guys just said. With VCA, we get really good benefits. I feel fortunate. I don't, I just don't have enough experience like as an employee at a private owned to like be able to compare and contrast. So I'm kind of curious, like Adam, what your experience was.
Yeah, so I will say that just comparing the two from my experience, the biggest draw to corporate is pay and benefits. They can just offer more in both areas. When I was a full-time employee at Banfield, the benefits were really good. So benefits were good, pay was good, and that was a big draw. They did have a fairly flexible schedule as well, just basically how many days a week you wanted to work. Obviously, things like that are going to vary a lot based on what company you're with and even your specific location that you're at and what they're willing to work with you when it comes to that. The biggest thing as well is structure, especially in one of those bigger corporations, the bigger ones you think of. There's a lot of structure to that, not necessarily with like your schedule, but just certain protocols, just how they handle certain situations. Not in terms of managing how you practice. They're very open to letting you practice the way you want to practice. which is, very fortunate. But just certain situations that they may have very structured, laid out plans, and some people really like that. The biggest thing that comes to mind at one big corporate practice I worked at was their sedation protocols. So they required blood work before any anesthetic procedure, and then they would have like critical stops for certain values. So if, say, I don't know, BUN is over 50 and it's a elective procedure, we're not doing that surgery. And that's just kind of their protocol. Some people like that because it gives some vets like that because it gives them some guidance and gives them something to kind of go off of and something to follow up with the client on. Because again, with that protocol, it would say, all right, you need to stop. And now you need to assess these things. You need to run an SDMA. You need to run a urinalysis. You need to do this other testing to figure out why the BUN is what it is. And again, some people like that structure, whereas others would prefer more of the flexibility of being like, well, yeah, the BUN's high, but the other kidney values are normal. The dog hasn't had anything to drink this morning. Historically, it's been a little elevated for its whole life. I'm not as concerned about it. I talked to the client with it. They're comfortable with it and they want to proceed, So there's kind of two ways to see that. And that is very dependent on the specific veterinarian and how they want to work. Some people like that structure. Some people want the flexibility. But that is another thing with those, big corporate owned practices that I've seen. Another thing is, moving up. If you want to advance your career and move up the ranks, that's there as well. So a lot of pros that come with that. Some cons depending on how you look at it. But the biggest thing that I saw when I was there, pay and benefits. I mean, that was a big pro. They just were able to offer more being a bigger company.
One thing I wanted to bring up or comment on that you mentioned, Adam, is a couple of those. So like the structure is really interesting because I've seen from my company, we're designed as almost separate individual clinics, but we do have corporate management and we have like regional managers or the equivalent of that. And then also a little bit more structure up top. And because I call it like quote unquote small corporate because I can text or call my CEO, and there are other companies I've worked at where it's like there's no way, like they're too big, and I wouldn't even expect for them to reach out to me or vice versa. But I've seen as we've grown new positions, like one of my adjacent mentors, if you will, from residency, like another doctor in the company that I relied on occasionally. One of his positions now is less clinical practice and a lot of outreach. And he's going around to different colleges and vet schools and working on that like school to veterinarian pipeline and lecturing and seeing like, how can we get more people interested in dermatology? How can we get more vet students excited about this? How can we get more people to know we even exist since there's so many clients that don't even know we're around as an option. And I kind of see that structure, and there's other jobs like that within my company where I'm like, oh, like at some point, if I don't want to practice as much, I can do that. Or medical director is an option, and different types of jobs as far as like organizational options for structures. Those other jobs that I can do that would require more knowledge, but are things where I can still use my degree in medical experience as a base and go up. And I do think there's something to say about like lots of corporate options often can pay more or have big investors that allow them to draw in new talent and offer more dollars potentially. Depends on the company you work for. But I kind of wonder like how that, I know we're going to hit the flip side in a minute, but like how that affects some of our more private owned mom and pop clinics, because sometimes you can compete and sometimes you can't. When some of these bigger companies do, if you have the expendable income, you can afford maybe to draw in talent or young talent and potentially take a loss for a little bit of time and then that's a lot harder for, like, I think the private mom and pops to do, even if they're maybe providing a more cohesive or quote unquote family experience, or a little bit more flexibility versus that structure that we find in traditional corporate.
Yeah, I think that's interesting that you bring up. Yeah, obviously, like you were saying, there's a lot of other options with corporate in terms of career paths you can take, even not, working as a practitioner.
Mm-hmm.
So that is definitely a benefit. It's interesting that you bring up the pay and how they're able to potentially take a little loss initially to recoup that later because they are so big and they have income coming from other sources. And that's definitely something we want to expand on later. So we'll jump into that a little more later. But like you said, on the flip side, I want to get into private practice and just kind of talk about some of the pros there. So, I mean, one big thing we see is flexibility with that. I would say one big thing too, or something that kind of goes along with flexibility. One example of that is when I was at those bigger practices. Say there was a new drug that came out that's really hot, that is working wonders, and everybody wants it. Everybody wants to get their hands on it to give it to their patients. Well, places that are big corporate owned have specific formularies that they can order from. And so they may not be approved for their formulary. So you may not be able to get that drug. Or just certain well established medications just aren't available to you through a big corporation. Whereas in my experience with private practice, they've just been like, what do you want? We'll get it. What medications do you want? We'll get it. You can use it. So that is one example of flexibility with private practice. So what are some other examples that you guys have seen, or what are some other pros that you guys have seen with a privately owned practice over a corporate owned practice?
This is Chris. I mean, I would say the privately owned one, honestly, even at our practice now, we still have good flexibility with family, but you can probably say like they're more allow you, hey, got my kid's sick, or understanding like there's not like the corporate over or having an issue with that. I mean, I don't know if that's everywhere. Like our practice has been fine with it, but overall, I would say that they can definitely, I guess, be more flexible, like you kept saying, with their other, with like more personal issues going on with like family or something. Have probably been the thing I would probably notice the most.
This is Brandon. Yeah, I don't know. It depends, I think, on like your administrator at the corporate owned practice, because they might have some things in place already where they've gone through that with another employee and they have a way to go get around it or work around it, or maybe you have like, as long as you've had like open conversation about, hey, I might need to change things. I've seen like just personally people that I've worked with at corporate practices like go through some like things where maybe what they thought was going to get approved as a like leniency didn't, and then on the flip side I've seen where like the person was just really happy that they were able to like help them out. But yeah, it's hard for me. I felt like the clinic that I worked at or shadowed at, I should say, back in Georgia, they did have like a general family feel. They were just all local people in the area, and like the people in the town like just knew of them really well, like knew the doctors by name. So like not even just working there, but like your clientele. I think the perception of like a really true locally owned practice is a big deal.
I think we hit the nail on the head on a couple of these, because when I think about like private or the mom and pop owned ones, one big thing that sticks out to me is like if you do have an immediate problem or need to be gone from work in general, I think it's a little bit easier because there's less, like when we say structure, there's also less, what do I want to say, of a line of people to go through, or there's less protocols that you have to follow. Like if I'm your manager and you're somebody, if you're an employee, you say, I'm not feeling well, I have to leave. You may still get to leave, but then that information does need to go up to an HR department or above. And there's more, you have to get some approval going. Or like Chris, when you mentioned medications, it may take a while. For example, in my practice, if I want a medication on the shelf, there's a good chance I know it'll get reviewed, and there's a good chance I'll even be told yes if I think it's really medically appropriate, but it may take a while depending on what I'm asking for. Like if it's something expensive, it may have to go above my current manager, and she might have to get approval from someone else. Or if I want to get it on the online pharmacy, there just may be a few extra steps versus when you're kind of in like a mom and pop local practice. HR is usually the manager. Like when I was 18, I was going to one person. I was like, "Hey, I feel terrible. Can I go home?" Immediate yes, you get out of here. And there's less of, well, let me go double check with somebody because this is just our protocol. And I think that's just the nature of it, for better or for worse, because there's also more oversight, I think, when you're dealing with corporate type practices. There's more protocols, there's more situations that they've seen, so they can get experience from other clinics. If you're having a weird situation, or we've talked about in the pod, for if you have situations that are like true HR problems, like somebody is making weird, uncomfortable comments, or like odd sexual comments, or odd racial comments, or racist things, there's a little bit more structure in those corporate practices because they're like, we've dealt with this before, or there's multiple clinics that we have, so there's more structure for that maybe a mom and pop might get once in a while and be working through. Or there's more, well, we want to help you, but we got to figure it out, that maybe in a corporate practice there's a little bit potentially more structure for, or more precedent for.
Yeah, and there's certainly a lot of differences. I mean, a lot of similarities too. We all have the same goal at the end of the day. But yeah, definitely some differences that we're highlighting here between corporate and privately owned. And really, it's not really one over the other. I mean, both of them have a time and place, and it really comes down to personal preference. In general, what we're kind of saying is, corporate practice, may have the edge in things like salary and benefits. You have that structure, whereas a privately owned practice has more overall flexibility with its staff, with its clients, may have more of a family atmosphere. Now, that's not to say corporate-owned practice may not have a family atmosphere too. That's very individual clinic specific. I've worked at corporate practices where that specific team was very close. So that can be there as well. And not to say that all corporate practices pay more than privately owned practices. So these are very much generalizations that we're stating, and it's going to vary from clinic to clinic. But again, the biggest thing is that, yes, there are differences, but it's not a right and a wrong. It's just very, very up to what is the best fit for you. So speaking of the best fit for you, new grads coming out of vet school, I mean, obviously there's a very high demand right now for veterinarians. At least that's in our area there is. And right now, the vet students that I hear about are just getting bombarded with offers from both corporate-owned practices and some privately owned practices as well. So I know we've kind of touched on pros of both types of clinics, but what do these students need to be looking out for when they're kind of going through these offers that they're receiving from both corporate and private-owned practices?
This is Jeff, and I'll say one that I think is really important, because we've mentioned like sometimes, not always, but sometimes, like corporate practices, when they can offer higher salaries, it's a good idea to be aware of, as you should go through your contracts anyway, but is there negative accrual to these high, shiny salaries that you're looking at that they're potentially offering? Meaning, do you need to bring in the amount of production that will compensate for the high salary that you're looking at? If it's higher than expected, then you're excited. You should be excited, but just aware that could come with a catch. So what is the catch for you offering me a higher salary than every other clinic in the area? And if there's nothing that you're afraid of, great, go for it. And you should. We worked really hard. We deserve to get paid for it and be able to pay off our loans eventually. But I think that's a big one to look out for. And I would say give them a chance if it sounds good and you're not too worried. I mean, dabbling, if you are able to dabble in mom and pop type practices and a little bit of corporate and seeing what you really like, I think that's really helpful.
This is Chris. I mean, I would agree with you, JT. There is just want to make sure, hey, the offer makes sense and look at just the benefits. And there's different pros and cons to different things that a corporate group or a private group might offer. Like Adam was stating earlier, like a lot of these things we're saying are just generalizations, but you might have like a really awesome corporate group and a really awesome private group, or vice versa, like not as good. It's just there's not like, you really just need to vet out the practices to see what it's like, how it is working there. Even though some places might have a super awesome offer, if it's not great to work there, or you're going to be miserable working there, or the schedule is just not the right one for you, there is a reason why they're paying so much. So it might make sense that, hey, I'm going to take a little bit of a pay cut to go work at a different place, but I have a better work-life balance. So, I mean, for any type of new grad, just play your options and talk to the vets at the practice. If there's multiple vets there, and see how it is working there. Talk to other vets, other even upperclassmen that have graduated already and been working. Like they can help you because they've just went through all of this, and they can kind of explain like, hey, this is what I look for. This is what I think. Or even mentors, they can be really beneficial in helping you kind of figure out, hey, this is what I want or what I'm looking for in a practice.
This is Brandon. Yeah, I generally agree with you guys. I think, you can, we kind of already talked about how like there are some like, you're more likely to get some better benefits with corporate practice. So that's something you'll have to like just see, does that outweigh some of the other benefits? And maybe you end up with a contract or a set of contracts that are pretty equal overall. It'll come down to some of the more like day-to-day things like are you living in the local area? Do you want that feel, as well as things like, are you okay that, your, HR is also just one person that you'll probably just see every day. Like those little things are going to be what it boils down to.
This is Jeff. I wanted to like mention, like there's pros and cons. We can ride the line all day on either choice, but I know that being at Tuskegee and I just remember that there was, I won't say any specific clinics, but I remember being a student and there was maybe a group of private owned like practices in a local area. We'll talk about this off the pod, but I know that there's a group of hospitals that several people got hired to that sucked. And I don't care. I'm never going to work there. But I just remember like chatting with upperclassmen and people who graduated, and they were like, yeah, like we worked at this one hospital. We thought it was going to be amazing, and it turned out not to be as amazing as they thought it would be. And there's some people who also have really negative views of corporate practices too for how they run their businesses. And so it really takes getting into the clinic, not looking at a practice just for its name, just because you think like a big name could be good or bad, but really getting into the clinic and seeing if you like the staff, seeing if you like the doctors there. Are the doctors at the practice that you're looking at a specific city and location good? Because there's negative views of some big companies, but then I've had friends who work at big companies, and then they're like, my clinic in my city is amazing for XYZ big company. I don't know what everybody else is talking about. Their clinics, they might not be good. Their staff might not be as efficient. Their technicians and doctors might not be people who you have good personalities with or gel with. So it's unfortunately, it is a very personalized experience where you end up. So it's hard to sit here and generalize, but I do think some of the things we've covered so far are general stereotypes or vibes that you get from these types of practices that you can take with a grain of salt, but then do your own research, get into a clinic and see how you feel.
Yeah, this is Brandon. I like that you put all that in there. Like the way I think about it, like every clinic is individual. So like there could be a amazing corporate practice, and then in another area of the country there could be the worst corporate practice, and maybe the only difference between the two comes down to the administration of the people that are working there, since policies are generally the same with corporate practices, or the big ones. They have like kind of a general mission statement and expectations across the whole corporation.
Yeah, you guys hit some really good points there. And I think that's a really good point too. And I'm glad you guys made that point, that, again, we're throwing out a lot of generalizations, but each practice is different. Like, a corporate practice that you work at in Kentucky, the same corporate owned practice in California, they could be completely different. So definitely when you get those offers, definitely look through them as individuals. Don't generalize those, but more so just know a little bit of the undertone that what comes with a corporate versus private owned. But the other thing that I will throw out there is that I do encourage students, when they get those offers, to find help. Find somebody who can go through those with you, some sort of professional that can help you through those. I know at Auburn they had one of those to help you review contracts. So find somebody that knows this stuff, because you have no idea. I mean, this is your first big boy, big girl job. And so you don't know what you need to be looking for. So reach out, ask for help, find somebody who can guide you through that and help you with that decision.
And this is Chris, and that kind of reminds me, Adam, just kind of knowing the differences between, if you're some corporate groups, depending on how big they are, might have a person that does all the contract negotiations. So you might be interviewing with the doctors and the staff at a certain practice, but then they'll have a person who's literally just a contract negotiator who tries to figure out what works best for you. And they're like the in-between between the corporate group, the practice, and then they're trying to figure out what works best for everybody. Versus if you go to a private practice, or as we're saying, like the mom and pop practices, you're most likely just negotiating with the owner. So that's also a different thing to think about, because again, it's not a big deal, but you're negotiating with either the corporate group, and they're not taking anything personally typically. And I'm not trying to say private ones do, but there can be sometimes a little bit more emotion with those as well, because you're dealing with that type of negotiation. And like Adam just said, I would definitely say go get a professional to either negotiate on your behalf in some cases, or just have someone review everything for you and make sure, hey, what you're signing makes sense. I know we've kind of talked about before, and like, hey, what to look for in a job in another episode. And we'll put that episode in the show notes, because I don't remember the exact episode that was, but definitely find help to negotiate and things, because again, we're not lawyers. We don't understand all the legalese of everything. So you want to make sure what you're signing and what you're looking at makes sense.
So just to kind of round this out here, I have one more topic related question. And this is kind of more so just about corporate practices and the trajectory that we're looking at for that. Before I ask this question, I will say that all of our answers to this question are just our opinion. Maybe things that we've heard or little rumors we've heard in the industry, but this is just our opinion based on what we've seen in terms of where things are going. So I saw an interesting thread, and this kind of connects back to what you were talking about earlier, Jeff, about corporate practices paying more and how that could potentially affect privately owned practices and what they can offer. I saw a thread recently on a veterinary thread that was talking about the high salaries, high signing bonuses, really good benefits that these corporate practices are able to offer, and the implications that has on private practices. Because private practices, locally owned practices, can't always afford to pay that, to offer those types of bonuses, those types of benefits. And what the specific forum was talking about how corporate practices have obviously become hugely popular over the past several years, where they're starting to buy up more privately owned practices. During COVID was a big time. I saw a lot of small privately owned practices in our area get swallowed up by corporate holding companies during COVID. And what I've heard from several people in the industry is that these companies kind of saw that during a time where the country was shut down, the pet industry, the veterinary industry specifically, was thriving, which I'm sure you all saw it just like we did. I mean, we were bombarded during COVID. I mean, we had people lines out the door, of people trying to get in to get their pets seen. And you have these venture capitalists and these corporate holding companies that just really seize that opportunity to buy up these practices. And so essentially what this was talking about was that these newer corporate holding companies essentially have only seen the industry in its prime. They've only seen the good side of the industry. They haven't seen the industry in a recession or when things are bad. So yes, things are good. Things are still going good now, and they're able to offer these high salaries, these high sign-on bonuses, these good benefits now while things are good. But where does that go when the recession hits? An inevitable recession or some sort of backslide in the industry. So I'm just kind of interested. I know that's a lot of buildup, but I'm just kind of interested to get everybody's opinion. Again, this is all our own personal opinions of where we see corporate veterinary practices going in the future. So is this something that's here to stay? Is this a fad that's going to phase out? Will eventually all practices be corporate owned? Where do you guys kind of see this going in the future?
I saw this the other day too, and I read it and I thought it was really interesting because it poses a point without an exact answer. And this is not necessarily a negative thing, but a matter of fact thing that because we have these large corporate practices there that are offering lots of shiny things, at some point there's going to be, or I guess the thread or the thought was like, they're going to want a return on their investment. And right now, while we're booming, they will see it. But like, will there become a time when, if they're not getting a return on investment, could something like, what is that going to look like? Or could something more negative happen? Or is there going to be an adjustment in salaries? Is there going to be an adjustment in benefits offered? Are they going to push the veterinarians to work more to compensate for any losses? Those are all questions we don't have the answer to. But I do think something like that is at some point going to happen. And I'm interested to see what it looks like. I do think in quote unquote the future of vet med, we're going to see more corporate businesses because, for better or for worse, when you are a larger business, I think right now, like, there's a very large incentive if you're a private practice owner and you can sell to a bigger company that wants to, I don't want to sound negative, but take over your practice. Hopefully, if they are wise, in my opinion, they keep the culture of the practice the same and allow you to still practice good medicine and offer you support in really, really positive ways. So it can be really good, but I do think just in general, we'll see more. I think we're going to see a lot less private owned mom and pop type practices. I don't know if they'll become completely eliminated, but that's clearly where we're going, is more corporate and less private practices. I think that's just a fact.
This is Chris. I can agree with that as well. It makes sense. I mean, also kind of going against your point with like, hey, mom and pop practices. There's some practices out there that they're not corporate candidates. They're just like, hey, we're not going to buy them. Those are typically the single doctor practices. At least what I've seen is because they typically, again, I'm not 100% on this, but from my understanding is corporate typically looks at, hey, if the owner sells, are there a couple other vets in that practice that they can still keep on board if that vet decides to leave, and then we can keep it going and then keep the corporate there because, hey, we have other vets there that can keep the practice going, keep kind of the culture going. So, yeah, I mean, my opinion is kind of like yours. I think we are going to go more corporate, but I do think there still will be some thriving kind of mom and pop places. Some people just like that. Some people want to practice that way where, hey, I'm just my own doctor, or you might have more mobile vet clinics kind of just doing their own thing. But overall, it's going to be interesting to see where we go with everything, especially with the rising in cost in vet med too. I think clients are also seeing it too. Is like things are getting more expensive. So it's going to be an interesting time. I do feel like we'll end up also being more reliant on insurance or dog insurance, cat insurance type of things versus right now. I don't remember the number. I think the number when they told us in vet school is like 1% of owners actually have pet insurance. So I don't know if that's changed or not now. Again, that was an old stat that I were trying to remember from 10 years ago. So
I know it's higher. I don't know the number now, but I know it's higher.
So good. And I think more people should have insurance for their pets to kind of help pay for certain, I mean, especially for the catastrophic things like, hey, my dog broke its leg and now it's thousands and thousands of dollars. Like some people just don't have that in their pocket. And that's where insurance definitely makes sense. But from a corporate versus thing on, I don't know. It's probably, like I said, I think it's just going to head that way. Just like you're saying, we'll see what happens.
This is Brandon. I think we're just going more corporate. The way I see it, it's just going to be more and more challenging for a smaller clinic, a local clinic to financially continue to like survive just based on the way I've seen things run. I don't know how much the corporations like are making. Like, I don't know how much VCA makes from an individual hospital. More likely than not, they're probably like not making some here, making some over there, kind of coming out to the even at the end of the day. But I think, eventually it'll go more and more corporate. And like to some of the points that I think you had made earlier, Adam, it's more of like the idea is if there was a downturn, like a smaller hospital would be able to, like maybe if the owner of that hospital just knows the people, he'd be willing to take his own pay cuts so that his staff can stay there, and that so on and so forth, which I hope would be like the case. But if they're doing just as bad, like cuts have to be made somewhere, and maybe those hospitals just eventually go under, and then those people have no jobs. So I think it's kind of hard, not being in that ownership side of things, admin side of things, corporate ladder, looking at regional areas side of things. It's hard to like say more on that, but that's just my kind of thought on that side of it as well.
Yeah, it's an interesting topic. It's kind of tough to predict exactly where things are going. Like I said, obviously, these are just our opinions with what we're kind of seeing in the industry. I think you all make some really good points. I think it'd be a fun topic to kind of expand on in the future, maybe get on somebody in the field of business forecasting to kind of rack their brain on where they kind of see the industry going. But definitely a good topic and a lot of valuable information to be had. So to end things on kind of a lighter note, we'll again just kind of go with one of our fun questions to end on. So if you guys had the opportunity to be on either reality show or game show, what would you choose and why?
So this is Chris. I would say, I had to look it up because I almost forgot the name of it. But do you guys remember the 90s show Legends of the Hidden Temple?
Yes.
So I would do that show.
Let's go.
Just from, it looks so much fun as a kid. I'm like, man, I want to go do all those obstacles. So that would be my pick, is bring back Legends of the Hidden Temple.
Chris, I always pegged you for like a, what's it called? American Ninja Warrior, Amazing Ninja Warrior.
Oh, yeah.
Somebody Ninja Warrior.
American Gladiator.
I mean,
yeah.
I appreciate you guys thinking that I'm in that good of shape, but I am not. So.
This is Jeff. My answer was going to be, I always said me and my sister, like we have really good, like intuitive, intellectual chemistry. Like I thought we'd always be good on like The Amazing Race because we get along really well. We got really close like after she left the house. Ironically, like typical like butting heads when we lived together, and then got out and I'm like, hey, bestie. I think that's the one I'd be on, like traveling and like figuring out challenges, trying to go across the world. I think that'd be a lot of fun.
That's a good choice.
This is Brandon. I have a hard time thinking of one. So like anything like good for me, but just being honest, I have a hard time. What I was going to say though, really quick, is I was going to just say like The Price is Right, because that's what, like I used to watch that with my grandma.
I love that.
But like, I don't know. I don't watch game shows that much. I don't watch a ton of game shows. Like with all the trivia game shows, I would suck. It would be bad because I'm like slow to react. I have to think. So that's a recipe for complete loss. And yeah, like when it comes to the other like more like puzzle type stuff, again, I'm not that quick. So Price is Right. It is.
It's a great answer.
That's a good choice for sure.
Yeah.
I love it.
So it's funny that you mentioned The Amazing Race, JT, because Allison loves The Amazing Race, and we've watched almost all of the seasons. It is really fun. And we always joke about how we could never go on that show because I can't see. I know I'm going to end up being the guy in the helicopter in the challenge that has to find the next clue in the cornfield down below, and we're just going to have to lose. We're going to lose. So
wild that they want you to see.
The Amazing Race will not work for me. It just won't. I would like to think that the game of Survivor has always really interested me. I watched several seasons early on. And because it's just a cool one, because like if you suck, you're going to get voted out. But also if you're too good, you're also going to get voted out. So you have to just like fly under the radar and like be friends with everybody, but still make alliances and stab everybody in the back. And so like there's so many layers to that game. So I think that one would be the most interesting. I just don't know if I have the intellect to be able to manipulate the way that I would need to be successful. I feel like I'd be voted off like first.
Adam, you're too nice. Like I think you would get got for being the nice guy.
Yeah. That's my issue with Survivor. There is, I don't know if you've seen the show Alone. There's just guys there and girls. There's just they just go by themselves and they have to survive out in the wilderness for X amount of days, basically just out surviving everybody else, and they're by themselves for however long it is.
Nar.
Oh, that's something I would consider.
Yeah,
that's a game show.
I would do that over like Survivor.
Naked and Afraid.
I'd still do it over Survivor. It's too much backstabbing in Survivor. It's like I don't know. At least like a weird feeling with me. Like I couldn't.
Yeah, it's cutthroat. It is.
I feel terrible.
We have to do it just. You have to do it just right, so you can like make it.
Yeah, I don't know. It gives me a bad feeling the entire time.
Yeah, pass. I'm also not built for that. Like they don't eat well. A lot of people who go on Survivor lose a lot of weight because they're not eating great.
True.
I'm not gonna make it. I'm gonna get helicoptered out.
That's true. I do like food. Maybe I'll just go on like Family Feud or something.
That's
good answer. Good answer. Thank you once again for joining us on the Dogtor Bros.
If you would like to support us, please share this episode with others who may be interested in today's topic, and leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcasts.
Would you like to influence our next episode? We love hearing your opinions and thoughts. Your comments may be our next topic.
Please leave us suggestions via email at thedoctorbros@gmail.com, DM us at thedoctorbros on Instagram, or leave us comments on our posts. Again, this is Brandon. You can reach me at Dogtor Mason IM on Instagram.
And this is Chris, and you can reach me on Instagram at dr.chrishernandez.
And this is Jeff. You can find me on TikTok or Instagram at DermDrJeff, DermDogtorJeff.
And this is Adam. You can reach me on Instagram at DrAdamDVM. That's DrAdamDVM.